Welcome to Cyber909, your source for wit and wisdom in cybersecurity and beyond. On this podcast, your host, Veteran Chief Security Officer and cyber aficionado Den Jones, taps his vast network to bring you guests, stories, opinions, predictions, and analysis you won't get anywhere else. Join us for Cyber909 Episode 6 with Dinah Davis.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Cyber909, podcast where we try not to really dig into breaches and incidents because I think there's a lot of great content out there. What we'd rather try and do is share lessons, experiences in the form of leadership and life and how we survive the wacky world of cyber. It's not easy sometimes, and burnout's a huge thing. So I've got great guests that come on the show, and I'm really privileged this show because we've got Dinah Davis, the founder of Code Like a Girl. She's a keynote speaker. She's a podcaster. She's just a badass in tech and cyber. Hey, welcome to the show. Now, why don't you actually do a better introduction?
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I think this is going to be fun. I love talking about, about cybersecurity, about tech and women in tech. So I thought I was going to be a math teacher because that's what my grade 12 counselor, who happened to be a man, told me to be, because I was good at math and I enjoyed math. That's what I went in. I was like, I like math. What should I do? And he's like, oh, you should be a math teacher. And I'm like, as if you told that to all the guys that came into that room and said, I love math. You probably told them to be engineers. But so I went to school to become a math teacher, and I very quickly learned that I loved mathematics more than I loved other people's children. And so I very quickly decided that I was not going to become a math teacher at all, actually. And in my third year, I took my first computing course, and I fell in love with it. I just thought this is just another way for how I think. It's like expressing how I already think as a mathematician, as a problem solver. And now here's this like really great real world application of what I love. And through various different things that happened to me, I stumbled upon cryptography, which led me to a master's degree in cybersecurity at the University of Waterloo. And from there, I met some of the guys who were working at Blackberry back in the early 2000s. And through that networking, I was able to get a job there after I finished my master's. So I got to live, eat, breathe the leading edge of mobile cybersecurity, which I just loved. And then I ended up in leadership after about 5 or 6 years of being a software developer because I was that weird software developer that would like look forward to the meetings. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me?
And I have a sneaky feeling that back in those days, BlackBerry were like the kings of secure phones, right? I mean, shit. People were always like, if you want to get a secure phone, get a BlackBerry. And I had a number of them over the years, and I thought they were the best ever. I mean, they were just really good tech. So were you doing a lot of cryptography as part of that first gig?
Yeah, actually, some of my favorite patents are around crypto algorithms that we built for over-the-air transport of a private key. It was like one of the first things I got to work on. And I remember there was this algorithm that we had, and the way Blackberries worked is you had your device, right? And they went through a back-end server called a BES, and that that's where we were connecting them through, through the relay and then the BES. And then they would send messages to your computer. right? And so what happened was there was this like government agency, we'll leave it nameless, but you can probably guess which ones might have been interested, where the users were using their Blackberry, but inside their buildings, they were not allowed to have Wi-Fi at all. Hold on. That's too long ago. There was no Wi-Fi. They weren't allowed cell service. They blocked cell service in those buildings. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi.
Wait a minute. Wi-Fi did not exist in the 1800s.
It didn't in the early 2000s. I mean, how much wire was in our houses? But anyway, what they wanted was they wanted to be able to plug their Blackberries in, but still get messages to the Blackberry inside the building. Where they were not allowed to have any like radio frequency. And to do that, we had to like figure out a way to send those messages. And anyway, we created an algorithm on the back end and I found a hole in it. I found a way you could actually attack it. And I think I figured it out while I was in the shower. Those moments, that's how they come, isn't it?
Yeah.
When
you're
really
trying to sleep at night or you're in the shower.
And then I was like, holy shit, I think you could hack that. Like, like what? So it was a very simple fix to it. And that's how I got my first patent with them. But yeah, we really got to work. I got to work on crypto, but more so even just protocols and how you put that together safely. Like crypto is great, but if you don't put it together in a secure way, like it's crap, if you can guess somebody's password, obviously, like doesn't matter how good the crypto is.
Yeah. It's funny. You don't need to guess people's passwords these days. You just go on the dark web and download it because they've probably been breached. They've been breached at some point,
That's right.
Now, so I'm curious to know, how did you get from you're doing the early career in Blackberry and then roll through to found Code Like a Girl? I mean, what was that? What was that journey? And then what was the inspiration to even start Code Like a Girl?
So in the Blackberry days, I was like heads down, trying to just be one of the guys. Because at that time, like early 2000s, maybe 10% of all software developers were women.
If you're lucky,
yeah, if we were lucky. And I was just like so early in my career, I'm like, I don't want to cause any waves. I don't want to be the feminist. I just want to be one of them. Right. And, fortunately, I was actually on an amazing team with amazing guys. And I never felt less than. My immediate team never, ever made me feel less than. Were there other issues in Blackberry as a whole? Yeah, but so were there in every other IT company you have. And we even built out our team to be almost 30% female at that stage. Like that was kind of crazy. But what happened was in 2011, you could kind of see, if you were inside Blackberry in certain areas, especially in the crypto team, you could kind of see the writing on the wall, where, there was a lot of infighting happening. People were more concerned about holding their empire than what was maybe good for Blackberry and the company as a whole. And I got headhunted out. And I kind of went, all right, well, Blackberry's the first, real non-co-op job I ever had. And I was there for 8 years. And so, you don't really even expect there to be a different kind of environment than the one you were in. Yeah. So I took the job. They promoted me from team lead to manager, right? It was a jump. And it was horrible. It was a horrible, horrible experience where my boss was a bully and a misogynist. And within 10 months, I think my whole self-esteem and just everything was broken down. Like everything I did, he questioned. And so when I decided to leave there, and it wasn't very long, it was about 10 months, I was like, I can't stay here. This is just a really not good place for me to be. Mm-hmm. I also realized that I didn't want this to ever happen to anyone else. At that time, I think my daughter was 4 or 5 years old. And it really hit home to me, this could happen to her. I don't want this to happen to her.
Yeah.
So why am I going to be quiet about what it can be like sometimes as a woman in technology or woman in cybersecurity? And so I decided, and I have now, a bit of a place of power with my resume, with having Blackberry on it in Waterloo region. That's a big stamp. It's like today having some of the other big guys, big companies on your resume, right? You're more sought after. I was like, I'm not going to a company that doesn't care about this anymore, or isn't going to be okay with me talking about it. So that's when I started blogging online about that experience. And I went to another company, and it was better. It was better. It wasn't perfect. No places, but it was better. And in around May of 2015, I went to this really amazing event, and it's called Think About Math. And it's something that the University of Waterloo runs every single year for grade 9 and grade 10 girls. They bring women who have graduated from Waterloo from either an undergraduate or a master's degree in mathematics. And they get us to talk about what our careers are like. So what can you do with a math degree? And so they kind of do this panel, and then you sit down with them with like kind of a poster behind you, says who you are. And you do this kind of speed dating thing with grade 9 girls, which is like actually quite intimidating. I will tell you. Now that my daughter is like in grade 11, it's less intimidating, but it was still kind of intimidating then. And I thought, okay, well, what can I give them for them to like take away the message that they could be in tech? And it was kind of like when Nike was doing the whole like run like a girl, throw like a girl, kind of taking that name back like a girl. Like that's a powerful thing, not a weak thing. And so I thought, well, what about like code like a girl? That'd be so cool. And so I made stickers. I created these little stickers, and I called them code, like I said, just code like a girl. And it kind of got something moving in my head. Yeah. So that's how they got created. And then about 6 months later, I created the Code Like a Girl publication on Medium. Because it just kept building on there. Right. And the reason I created the publication on Medium was because I was writing stuff about being a woman in tech in 2015 and 2016. And if you could get your work into a publication on Medium, it would get more views. And I thought, well, that's better, right? I want to change people's perceptions of what a woman in tech is like. I want them to, like, I want it to have more voice. So I tried submitting my work to 1 or 2 publications, and it didn't really work, and there wasn't really a lot out there. So I thought, okay, well, how hard is it to create a publication? And like, it turns out like a couple clicks. And then you're in it. It's like you're like, how hard is it to create a podcast? And then you do the first one super easy, and then you're like, oh my god, now I'm doing it.
Now I'm a podcaster, professional.
Now I run a publication, and because I thought, what's stronger than my voice, but hundreds and thousands of voices. And like recently, we just have over 1,000 published writers with Code Like a Girl.
Wow.
We have over 3,000 articles lifetime published. I would not be shocked if we're crossing the 4,000. We have 47,000 subscribers. So yeah, it's huge. It's cool. It's grown into this thing I never knew it would, and I think it's always just because like when you do something you care about and you care about it a lot, it ends up growing,
And so for people who don't know what Code Like a Girl is, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so it's a publication on the Medium platform. So like if people are familiar with Medium, it's a blogging platform basically. And we accept articles from women mostly. We're targeting articles around their experience as a woman in tech, writing about leadership. And we do accept some articles from those who identify as male, but only if they're about allyship, only if they're about fixing the problem. Because sometimes I get guys applying to write for Code Like a Girl to just write technical articles. And my opinion is kind of like, there's a lot of places on the internet you can do that. You don't need my publication.
Yeah, you can put that shit somewhere else. And I kind of look at it like there's a great opportunity. Oh, and by the way, we'll put the links in our show notes so that people can
That's great.
easily find the platform and all this great content. And actually, when we were doing a prep talk, you provided a whole bunch of stuff, and I was reading some of the articles, and there's some excellent work in there. So I think whether you're an aspiring female in tech and you want to learn and participate, or you might be a male in tech and actually want to educate yourself. This is some great content there, so I would highly recommend it for anybody. One of the things I found interesting on your journey is, and a lot of females in tech that I speak to, there's always somewhere in their journey where just someone treated them like a second-class citizen.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a call to action internally that something needs to change in our industry. And, I know myself, look, I remember my leadership style back in the 90s. I was a lead of 2 people and I was shit at it. I mean, I was just the worst leader ever.
But aren't we all when we start, really?
Yeah. And you're honing your craft,
have to learn.
Right? Yeah. So what would you say? So what advice would you give a female leader in her first leadership job? What would be the one thing you'd say?
Oh man, that's like a really good question.
I have 1 or 2 good questions a year. Took me months to come up with that shit.
I think one of the biggest things I would say is first to believe in themselves, right? Because you deserve to be there. I hate that we talk about imposter syndrome a lot because I think a lot of stuff just gets kind of swept under the rug of imposter syndrome. Yeah. But I mean, it's real, and it's I know it's there for men too, but I think it's there. It's really there in tech a lot.
I was just about to ask that. Do you think imposter syndrome is worse for females than males? Because I think so, based on the people I've worked with over the years.
I think, there's one thing that we talk about a lot that for years we've talked about is how women apply to jobs versus men, right? So, and they've done lots of studies. I don't have them off the top of my head, but they've done lots of studies where a man only needs to see like 50% on a resume or on a job posting. Like they're like 50% of the job they feel like they could do. Great. They're going to apply. But intrinsically women, it's like they need to see 95% of that job description describes what they could do. Yeah. And they won't apply unless that's true. And so a lot of times, like when I'm coaching people, I'm coaching them to think bigger, dream bigger, accept that they are capable of these things, that they don't even have to know how to do half of this stuff, because a job description is a wish list. They're looking for a unicorn that usually doesn't even exist at all.
I get a unicorn. It's in the logo. And so that's a huge thing though, because I don't want to underplay that, because Adobe, I was there for 20 years, and a lot of my leadership career and mentoring that I received and mentoring I gave played out, as I would say, I went from a child to a professional at Adobe, right? One of the things that they do fantastically well is they do a women's executive shadow program. And that's for aspiring women who want to be leaders, and they can shadow executives. All the way to the CEO participates in this. I had a female leader in my team, actually. She got to shadow the CEO. And that was fantastic. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, shit, I never got that. So I'm like, oh, that's brilliant.
No, but you had all the other advantages.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure I would ever want to shadow the CEO anyway. I'd probably be too intimidated. But she wasn't. She was brilliant. And ultimately, for me, as an executive in that program, the thing I done differently than everybody else was I wouldn't make it about one day. I would basically speak to the woman. I'd speak to her manager. And beforehand, I would prep and say, what are you trying to get in your career? What would you try and get from this experience? So from a mentorship for me, I was like, screw that one day thing. I want to know what would benefit you the best in this journey. And in the journey, you might want to learn about, get hard conversations and one-on-ones. You might want to learn about strategic planning. These 5 things you want to take away from the experience, they don't all happen in one day.
No, they don't.
So
what do you think was the most common thing they wanted or needed to learn?
I think there was a couple of things. One that you mentioned, I think, is about confidence and the difference between how guys operate and girls operate, which is, like you say, they're not applying for the job because they don't see themselves matching everything. Where guys will be like, screw it, fake it till you make it, right? And I think when they were coming with me, a lot of it was they wanted to learn more about conversations and conflict. They wanted to learn more about guiding a team to come up with a vision, a mission, and a strategy. So how do you go through that process? And I think the other thing was a lot of it more was just really about how different teams and organizations run so that they could get a better understanding of different teams in the business. So, and they didn't get to pick their poor executive. The HR team matched them with executives. Now I think you could request like with Shalini in our case, she's like, I want Shantanu, and I'm like, okay, let me speak to my friends at HR and we'll try and make that happen, right? And we luckily did. So, but ultimately, I remember one of the years they even done roundtable sessions at lunch like the month before, and you'd have like one exec and maybe 10 females, and they would just pop questions at you. Like it would just be like a whole Q&A.
It's the best, isn't it?
Yeah. And I participated in that, I think, for 5 years, maybe, from where they considered me an executive, I guess, all the way till I left Adobe. But for me, it was one of the things I looked forward to because I learned from these women that were shadowing. So it's not like, you'd sit there and you'd have lunch or we done a team happy hour, like a few weeks later. And I'm like, oh, why don't you join the team happy hour? So I'm trying to like remain friends and like try and help in the careers.
But that's actually what we need from men in the industry, because there's all these paths already where men just get invited to things. They just tag along, right? And creates that club that, creates the old boys club. But if you start expanding the lines of that and blurring the lines of that and inviting women into those spaces, then that's how they also get to make those networking connections. And, a lot of organizations are out there trying to help create that for women as well. There's lots of great things for that too. But I think, there's a lot of times when men ask me, well, how can I help? Like that's a big part of Code Like a Girl too, is like, we're trying to, we know there are so many guys out there that want to support women that are not, they're not sexist. They're not trying to be, they're not, they want to be allies and they just don't know how. Right. And so, like my biggest tips for those are like, talk about the women when they're not in the room, support them and promote them to your peers and your leaders when they're not in the room, right? That's a huge thing. And then the other thing is in meetings. There's so much you can do in meetings because, and even the Obama administration, the women in the group of the Obama administration would often in politics get talked over in the meetings. And they came up with this strategy that I also like, I had also been kind of building, but then heard they were doing, and I'm like, oh, cool, this is good. Which is, when women are interrupted, interrupt back for them. So it's not that person. Like if we have, June in the room and June says something and all of a sudden she's interrupted by John, then I can be like, oh, hey, John, I don't think June was done. June, what else do you have to say? Because they might not be bold enough to say, oh, excuse me, I was talking.
Yeah.
Right. And things like of that nature.
And I think, I mean, that's great, because it's this is the one thing, is if you don't create an environment that's collaborative, where all voices are heard regardless of gender or ethnicity or
Right.
whatever, then you're not creating the right environment.
That's right.
I would like to say that sometimes in my career, I do interrupt people because I get so excited and I don't want to forget my thing, and I'm like, I used to have a sign on my office door, and it said, so something like about pardon the interruption, I got excited about my thought or something. but it's like acknowledging, for me, that's something I was working on, consciously working on my brand, my communication style. And I think, as you go through your leadership journey, for all of us, it's a continual, I look at leadership like it's a continual journey of learning. Like
It
I'm
is.
not done yet, and I'm still trying to be a better leader.
So what's funny though is I'm also an interrupter. So and I know that, and my husband's not. So that's like we're completely opposite that way. As like I've learned so long, like sometimes I have to pause and allow him to come in. But that was also really important for me, like whether it was women or men on my teams. Like I led a lot of teams and a lot of people, and some of the best people were, more quiet, more introverted. And if I wanted to make sure that I knew what their opinions were, I had to make space for them in the meetings, right?
Yeah.
I would have to be like, okay, Dave, I can see behind your eyes. Like, it's not what I'm saying, but like I can see behind, somebody's eyes, like they're thinking something, but they're never going to interrupt. So I'll be like, hey, Dave, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
You have experience in this area. And, not that they always want to get called on, but you have to know your people a little bit too, but you have to create space for especially your senior devs and other people in the room to make sure that their voice is being heard, because they've got important things to say, right? They just might not be comfortable saying them.
And the one thing for me, talking is my medium, I guess people would say, or Dan talks a lot. Either way, I'm a conversationalist. I'm a storyteller, and ultimately, for me, that translates on the flip side, which means I'm pretty uncomfortable with silence.
Yes.
I can't like contain myself sometimes, and I've tried to like. I had a mentor years ago, career coach, and she told me probably 15 years ago, I need to meditate. She's like, Dan, you need to meditate. The stress you're under at work, because I was running all the stuff that's always on, like all your identity and servers and labs and all sorts of shit over the course of my career, and I could never meditate because I couldn't sit for a minute. And
I can't
in silence.
either,
I'm like,
though.
oh, I've now I am practicing that. I also took up yoga. Yeah. And I love going for walks and hikes and stuff like that. So getting out in nature. So I'm trying, to manage, I think, as an executive, and like the stress you're under these days, you need to find methods and mechanisms to manage that stress. Do you feel now? I was kind of going to jump back on this. There was something you said earlier. When you think of females trying to survive this journey, or not survive, that's a shitty word, thrive. I'd say thrive,
sure,
right? So you're trying to thrive, and then some idiot pulls you down and stuff, and or cuts you off, or whatever the thing is, or they're dismissive of you because you're a female, or what coaching do you give from the emotional side? Like, do you tell people, hey, think about, like, don't see that as a slate on you, see that as a slate on them? How do you coach people through that?
Yeah, well, even that's something that I really struggled with myself, because I seem very extroverted. I'm very confident in the workplace. Apparently some people were sometimes afraid of me. I never knew this. But but I also take everything personally, because I care so much about wherever I'm working or whatever I'm doing and the people I have, I always care so much about them. And so, when you get cut off, when you get dismissed, like I would take that probably too personally. And I had a great manager for a while, and he just kept telling me, Dinah, you got to be a duck sometimes. You got to just be a duck and let it wash off your back, because it's not personal to them at all. And I think that is, I think that was a hard lesson for me to learn. I think I learned it to a degree. I think I'll never fully learn that, because it's just not who I am. But at the same time, you have to in some way separate yourself from those events because it's work, and it's not about your personal life. And like if you internalize everything that happens, like you're gonna have a really bad time. There's just too much politics. There's too much of that other stuff that happens that makes it really hard, and you have to keep that separation there a little bit. But yes, it's learning how to be a duck and letting it go, like letting it flow off your back. That's my biggest piece of advice, because you have to, like, people don't mean everything they say, and they don't even realize they're doing it half the time. Like they're just focused on the task at hand, and you were just carnage sometimes.
And I think, and so you've got different personality types and stuff. And, if someone's an introvert, they're also not necessarily looking to call that person out or confront them later on, because, not everyone likes conflict. Yeah.
Right. Like you're an executive. Like I was a VP at my last company, and the CEO says something that you maybe take personally, the rest of the group doesn't. It's not the time to call them out on it.
Yeah.
And you have to evaluate whether or not it's even worth it for you to do later, or if you just need to be a duck and move on and care about other things.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things come to mind, right? One is I learned a lot about emotional strength quite a few years ago, maybe about 6 years ago and stuff. I was going through some life shit as you do. And Tony Robbins had a really good podcast on emotional strength. And it was all about the ability to disconnect from taking it personally.
Yeah.
Check your ego at the door, step back, and imagine you're giving that person advice on how to handle that situation. So you're now looking down on yourself, advising yourself as if it's not you. It's a really, really hard thing to do.
It is.
I try to do it. I try to do it whenever I'm in conflict. I sometimes even try to do it when I'm not in conflict and I'm just trying to figure shit out for myself, right? Now, the other...
One thing I'll add, though. If anything is discriminatory, then that's different. You call that out. If you feel comfortable, if somebody else sees it, call it out. I'm not talking about like just ignoring completely discriminatory behavior. But second, and I think a lot of women do this, and I know some men do this too, is, like I always expected so much of myself. I expected myself to be better and better and better and better every single day. And for me, that manifested into bad things in two ways. One, it created an eating disorder, because I focused that for many years on my body, and my body had to be perfect. Because if it wasn't, holy hell, the world might fall apart and no one will respect me. How could anyone respect me in a bigger body? Which is complete bullcrap, right? But and then secondly, just taking in everything that was happening, and every time something bad happened, just like internally beating myself up about it. And part of that energy is what sometimes makes amazing leaders and amazing people, right? We're very self-aware about what we're doing, so we always want to make it better. The flip side is, if you don't have some empathy for yourself, then you're going to end up in a world of hurt, which, I have done a
Yeah.
couple times,
Yeah.
right? And that was, I think, one of the harder like therapy sessions that I went through a number of years ago was having the therapist, I telling her everything that was going on and how stressed I was and like, why wasn't I doing better? And why wasn't I, handling things better? And she just looked at me and she said, now imagine your best friend sitting right across from you, and they have just told you all of these things. What would you tell your best friend? Would you tell them to just buck up and move on and keep working harder? Or would you look at them and go, oh, honey, I'm sorry. That's really hard. That is so hard. I'm sorry you have to go through that. How can I help? And trying, and like, she literally made me do that whole exercise of like putting myself in that other side of that chair and, what would you say to yourself? And that was a big moment for me, a big aha moment of like, I am treating myself poorly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really common in high achievers, like extremely common in high achievers, because like, I think we're almost all high achievers. And this is just personal anecdote, but we all have some level of anxiety we're dealing with, which is what makes us amazingly good at our jobs, because we're anticipating everything. But it's a fine line between that and our own mental health.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things in there, right? So that advice is brilliant. It's actually very similar to that whole Tony Robbins thing.
Yes, that's what ticked me off on it.
Yeah. And I think that's great advice. And the problem, I mean, there's a couple of we could talk for hours on this shit. There's a couple of things in there though. One of the nuggets is women contend with the whole visual aspect of themselves in business, whereas a lot of guys don't give a shit. Now, personally, I do, because I'm trying to be the handsome guy. I think the whole, the accent, the package. I'm like, yeah. And actually, and even for me, my whole life, even as a kid, I've always had this kind of, I'm not going to say body dysmorphia, but I've always looked at myself in the mirror and been like, oh, I wish I was better. But that's never translated into that motivation for me to go to the gym. Right. I'm like, I hate the gym,
or have any kind of disordered eating or
exactly. Yeah. So that's I think that there's a big difference. And these days with social media and everything else, I think it's worse for kids growing up even now, like the abuse and the self-reflection and the I'm not good enough. And the reality is I think, regardless of gender and stuff, I think people have just got to like piece out on their looks and their appearance. Yep. And the other thing is focus on things you're in control of, not things you're not in control of. And I know, like, I've been in circumstances professionally, and I've been in situations, being in events that are seriously gnarly work events, like outages or breaches and stuff. And the only thing I encourage my team to do is basically say, we're here now. Let's show people just how good we are.
Yes.
And dig our way out, or fix the problem, and don't get hung up on how we got here.
Yes.
So I look at that. And then the one thing, and we talked about the fake it till you make it business, but I look at it like there's a lot of women in their career that they're basically, they're not just fighting against the man versus woman and is a woman as good as a man bullshit, and is the pay equal and all that stuff as well. They're fighting their own internal demons. And then they're also fighting with the fact that they might be juggling 5 things, like, hey, I'm still raising children. I'm doing it. I'm doing my job. And my old music teacher, because I'm a big music nerd, right? My old music teacher, he told me this. I was probably about 15, 16 at the time. And he always said to me, Dan, here's why women are better than guys. He went, we have one career our whole life. That's all we do. He went, I'm a plumber till I die. He went, a woman, though, She went, she goes through going through college or university. So that's one movement. Might get a job. That's a movement. Then might go and have kids and be a mother and bring kids up. Then might go back to work, may go back to the same career or even a different career. He went, this ability to reinvent themselves without thinking about it. He went, that's just what their journey is. He went, whereas dudes, we do one thing.
I think that's because society has forced us to do that. And I think it does us a disservice.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of people will ask me, how do you do everything? You do so much, Dinah. And like, how do you do that? And like, my answer is because it takes a bloody village. Like my husband, who is a software developer, probably about 9 years ago, when I was at the height of my job at Arctic Wolf and a VP and like just really run off my feet, he started working 90% time instead of working 100% time, because we knew like at that moment, I had more on my plate. And he like, who does that? My amazing husband does. But like I literally mentioned that to my CEO, and he just looked at me like, why would he do that? I was like, my husband was crazy to like care about his family and to care about that. And you know what? He still works 90% time, even though I am now retired, because now it's worked better for him. He gets just as much work, if not more, done, but then gets to spend time around the house and do things. I also have my parents live nearby for all the winters. They don't live nearby in the summer, but they really helped. Friends that helped. Like, I don't think you achieve great things without and be a mother and a daughter and all those things without people supporting you and making hard calls. Like, I created Code Like a Girl in 2016. I ran it, and you know what? I stepped down in 2018 because my life was too crazy. It was too much. And thankfully, thank God, there was somebody who was willing to take it over. So it didn't die. And this wonderful lady, she took it over for 2.5 years. Like, I fully gave it to her. Like, I was done, and I was just helping advise her. And then, her life blew up 2.5 years later, and it just so happened that mine kind of had calmed down a bit, and she was like, do you want it back? And I was like, I absolutely want it back, because now I can spend more time in it, right? So last 1.5 years I retired from corporate life, January 2023. Now I spend a lot of my day working on that, and I'm so glad I have it. But it's hard choices. Like, you don't get to have, I think they really like people, those of us who grew up in the 90s, especially women who grew up in the 90s. There was this really big push for us to say, like, you can have it all now, this like really amazing like feminist movement that happened, but it also kind of expected you to just do it by yourself. Like, you can have it all, but and there was just no kind of concept about how hard that would be.
And the support, I mean, this is the one thing for me, like, I don't see anybody being successful in life. And by the way, how you measure success is a very individual thing, right?
Right, yes.
I had that conversation last night with my best friend, actually. We were just talking about that. And it's like, look, success might mean lots of money, or it might mean that you love, 50% of the time you're just walking trails, right? But no one reaches a level of success without having that support system around them. Because I look at it even in corporate life, like, we would never deliver the projects or the work we've done without having great network, great support structure, allies, and then also a strategy that we would collaborate, and there'd be a group of people with different and diverse thinking and abilities to execute. I look at that the same in life as I do in professional situations. Now,
I think the difference is that everyone expects that for the men in the organization, right? So, like, it is understood that your wife's going to take care of things for you. That if you're working late, your wife's got the kids. but
Yeah.
it's not understood that support isn't always there for the women in the organization. And because they're not always as lucky as I am to have the husband that I have.
Yeah.
And then they get penalized for it. Right.
Yeah, and I think you know, I know we're way over time, but
I knew that would happen.
I
Totally knew that
wonder,
would happen.
yeah, I mean, I think when COVID hit, I think, you know, as shitty a situation as it was, I think there's a couple of things that came out of it, which is people no longer want to be entrapped into this corporate life where
Yeah.
they're busting their ass, they're not getting the thanks anyway.
Mhm.
And ultimately, when you could work from home, you suddenly realize you're like, wait a minute, I quite like the freedom and flexibility that
Yeah.
that provides and the ability to manage your household. I totally agree. I had this conversation with someone a couple of months ago. One of my friends at Sonic Wall, and she was traveling a lot. She's always traveling for Sonic Wall. And we were just talking about the fact she's got 2 young daughters. And I'm like,
It's hard.
how, when she can't make the trip because of family stuff, then or when she does this, and then everyone's like, well, who's looking after your daughters, right? And so that this whole thing of is expected that the mother does it, but not the father, is like nonsense. But I think
It's really
culturally,
interesting too,
we're still
because
there.
I've seen the same backlash happen to men in the office that do the same thing. So I don't know if you're aware, but like in Canada, when you have a kid, the mom can take up to a year of maternity leave. Now, part of that is 30 weeks is maternity leave, and then the other 30 or 20 weeks or
22
so
weeks
is parenting. Parental leave, sorry, parental leave. So the man in the relationship cannot take maternity leave, but they can take parental leave. And that parental leave can be split between the couple. And so in a few situations at work, what we're starting to see, and I love seeing this, it's amazing, is that, you know, the dad takes like 30 or 20 weeks of parental leave because they can, because it's their right to do so. Either to allow his wife to go back to work or just to support them at home.
Yeah.
And they get looked down on in the same, like it has a similar impact to their career. Like, how could your family be more important than this job? Like, how could you just leave? Right? Do you know the imposition you're putting us in? Who's going to work on that project?
Yeah. Now, I California had paid family leave act as well, and I can't remember how many. I mean, my daughter is 19, my son's 14, so it was a long time ago for me. But sure as shit, I took that time. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And sometimes and this is the thing for me was just from a career perspective and a work-life balance perspective. I went from, I ran enterprise security at Adobe, then I ran enterprise security at Cisco, and then I left both of them to join a little rinky-dinky startup with 100 people, one office, and I'm running security and IT, and I was like on holiday. I mean, it was literally like the best, you know. And I loved the team, I loved the company, but I took a big hit pay cut wise for that, but emotionally much happier.
Yeah.
My time, like at Cisco, I was in like 14 meetings a day from 6 in the morning till 6. I'm like, that's all killing me. And at the end of it, I'm like, and I didn't enjoy working with a lot of the people that I was working with. I mean, some of them were gems and some of them were just a pain in my ass. And but and corporate bullshit, right? And then, you know, I could do it. I could do it if I want to do it. But I think the big thing in life, and, you know, parting, you know, as we wrap this up, parting wisdom for me is, you know, think about where you want to be when you're in your deathbed and you're looking back in your life.
Yeah.
That's when you have regrets. Everybody I know of that they talk about when somebody passes, right, just before they die, that last day or the final hours, they look back in their life and have regrets of the things that they did not do or wanted to have done or whatever. And I tell people this, I'm like, imagine you're there. what regrets do you have? Things that you didn't do in your life, spend more time with your kids, spend more time with your partner, travel. And then look now to say, what about my career and the jobs in my career? How do they enable that life to be good so I don't have
Yeah.
regrets? And we are so focused on this bullshit rat race that
Mhm.
we're not thinking about the fact we're here to live. You know, this is
Yeah.
meant to be an enjoyable life. So yeah, now I'd love you to leave parting words for our audience. Dinah,
Mm.
if you could give one piece of advice or one takeaway that I think helps improve the diversity of women in tech, what would that be?
Oh, be their ally. Be their ally in the room and when they're not in the room. It has nothing to do with the number of diversity theater items and events that you put together. I could care less. You could do none of those things. You could have no women in tech events ever. But if you showed up for the women in your organization and you supported them in the room and when they're not in the room every single day,
Mhm.
that is the biggest thing you can do. Women and men supporting each other, but like it, it's supporting them when they're not in the room. Honestly, that is my biggest takeaway. Because being supportive of diversity when no one's looking, not
Excellent.
when you're having all the theater events that you do. That does not make you diverse. If you have all these events and I look at your sea level and it's only white men, I'm not going
Yeah.
to believe a single thing you're saying.
Yeah. No, that is great. That's excellent. Well, Dinah, thank you very much.
You're
This
so
is
welcome.
excellent. It's funny because I tried to have you on the last pod when I was at Banyan, and then we got acquired, so that all got put on pause. And because I saw you in another podcast, I'm like, holy shit, I want to start chatting to this lady. She
Thanks.
knows her shit. And literally for me, I was just like, wow, this will be great. So it took so long for us to spin up the new pod. So I'm
It's all
grateful
good.
for your time, and yeah, I would love to check in again at some point in the future, get you back on and hear how things are moving on. I want to keep the topic fresh for people,
Yeah, for
top of
sure.
mind, and hopefully we can make a difference. But thank you for all your great work. We'll see each other again soon.
Yes, it was great. Thanks so much.
Take it easy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Cyber909. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and don't miss an episode of your source for wit and wisdom in cybersecurity.